right, there we go. Hello, fellow survivors. I apologize. I was originally going to do this with Amanda. We teased it as such, but she's actually quite busy. So even in this world of, full remote, everything these days almost, it turns out there's still a decent amount of demand for digital content. So Amanda's actually swamped, and I'm going to be fielding this edition of our Facebook Live myself, but I can still speak to this. The premise here is how can you build camaraderie in a remote collaborative environment? So here's a scenario that I imagined has happened, and I think I've even anecdotally heard this a few times from people in the last week, which is we were all, doing our thing in the workplace, going out to lunch, having that sort of team collaborative environment. Then we all went home and it feels like we're in complete isolation. So we have a company Slack, or, we do chat about things on IM, but it feels completely hollow, or nobody's really talking or taking advantage of any of these things. So, that's probably a bummer, especially for those of you that might be pretty extroverted, not a hermit like me who's been working in these circumstances for years. And I can sympathize to an extent, empathize. I mean, life would get pretty lonely even for me after a while of having no interaction with people. But we also have been running a Slack and an online community for years. And so I feel like I can speak pretty well to some things that have worked, maybe that haven't over the years, for fostering that camaraderie that might be missing right now in your life if you've just gone remote and you're suddenly at home by yourself, wondering where all of the other people are. I mean, they're there. You could email them, but they're not really there. So anyway, just a brief bit of background. My wife Amanda and I are digital nomads and remote first business owners. So we've had this business for 3 years. Everything has always been entirely remote. So that's been our life for 3 years. But even kind of beyond that, I have a number of digital nomad or entrepreneurial communities that I'm in. So it's not just what we've built with our business Hit Subscribe. It's also what what I've participated in over the years that are kind of similar people. If you don't know what a digital nomad is, it's somebody with a completely remote work profile that can and does travel all over the place and work from wherever. So I'm in a community that's oriented at entrepreneurial digital nomads, and another one that's bootstrapping tech entrepreneurs. And so from these communities, I've learned some lessons. So let me get to those lessons. Here's some tips that might liven up your workplace's Slack or whatever it is you use for communication. The first one is going to be like super topical, and it's the last time I'm actually going to talk about the coronavirus, but let's talk about the coronavirus. If you have a workplace Slack and you think of that as being topical to bring up, that might actually generate a lot of activity in your Slack or in your, Basecamp or whatever you're using to collaborate. But it's going to be weirdly isolating in a way that might surprise you, which is this. If you go onto Facebook, this is probably the best place to see it. You are just going to be inundated with information about the coronavirus. And mostly it's people lecturing you, yelling at you, calling you stupid, conspiracy theories, like all sorts of things. There are people who are very active and sharing a lot of opinions and very, understandably nervous about everything that's going on. And then there are going to be people kind of on a sliding spectrum who are at the other end that are really kind of tired and overwhelmed by all of that, and they don't want to see that. So if in your community's common channels, what you're seeing is just lots of updates and discussion and argument about coronavirus, that's going to drive a lot of people away. It's going to be a very vocal minority, and everybody else will not want to be in there at all. So what I would suggest you do first and foremost, create a channel for those people who really want to be active and discuss it. Let them go there and discuss it, and then kind of let your other main channels, like in Slack, it's going to be general or random, let those remain more sedate and maybe not kind of 24-hour apocalypse coverage all the time. So that's kind of a way to at least not drive people out of the discussion. Now, getting away from that and talking about more general tactics, if people aren't really used to collaborating in that sort of an environment, they might be hesitant to take the first step. So you can do some facilitative activities that are like surprisingly simple. They may feel a little hokey to you, but like honestly, if you do this, it will spark some discussion. So one of the things that you might do is to just kind of have in your back pocket some kind of innocuous memes or bits of comedy that aren't controversial, things that you can share. Or maybe it's, I've seen on social media like videos of penguins like running around an empty aquarium. So if you share stuff like that, people will react and comment. That is a good way to get engagement. Another thing that you can do is actually prepare, maybe a backlog of discussion questions. And then just queue one of those up a day in, the random channel where people gather to discuss. What is your favorite hobby? I'm not going to be good at thinking of this facilitation isn't really my forte, but if you brainstorm some stuff like that in advance to get people talking and socializing, just kind of that muscle memory of going in there and doing a little water cooler style socializing can actually get things going and lead to discussions and interactions that people might have in their downtime instead of just tumbleweeds in there. And then actually, those are things that, I've learned by experience, but we had some interesting, we solicited suggestions and hit subscribe Slack and folks chimed in with stuff. And there were a couple that I'd never really thought of that were great suggestions that I'll mention here in terms of just getting people into the chat and chatting. One was say hello when you start working in the morning and goodbye when you're done in the afternoon or evening, like the way you would as if you were in a physical office. So when you show up, say hi to everybody, and when you leave, say goodbye to everybody. And that, that's genius. I mean, my goodness, that's going to get people in there and talking, and it's going to sort of spur normal conversational dynamics that you're used to. Everybody's comfortable with it, and people will say hello. If you see someone say hello and you're in there, you'll probably say hello or, at least give a wave emoji or something. And then that led to another point that this particular person raised, which is be liberal with the emojis and reactions. So if somebody says hello or somebody says something, then at least, throw an emoji, throw a reaction on what they're saying. So it doesn't create the experience of they type and share a thought and it's just crickets. It's like he called it shouting into the void. But like, imagine if you showed up at your office and, you said hi to everybody or something and nobody looked up. Like that would be a super, not only weird, but like off-putting experience. You'd say like, well, I'm certainly never going to talk again. So if people aren't familiar with remote kind of asynchronous collaboration, if you're used to a lot of back and forth, showing up, typing something in a Slack, expecting your coworkers to respond and then nobody does, that can be surprisingly discouraging. So when people do socialize, make it a point to react, even if it's later. Now, in terms of getting a little bit more, I guess, organizational, doing a little bit more planning with things, I would suggest, queuing up some events. So one thing that we've done at Hit Subscribe, with varying amounts of participation, depending on I guess, time and when we were planning and how far ahead, is to schedule, socials or happy hours. Now with Hit Subscribe, this is sort of a uniquely difficult proposition because our contractor workforce is literally all over the world in like every time zone. So picking a time for everyone to get together for us, probably a little more challenging than it'll be for you. But I would suggest maybe scheduling a lunch or maybe an after work happy hour, kind of something similar to whatever your team does when they're all together. But, do that same thing over video. Schedule a Hangout or GoToMeeting or Zoom, whatever you use. Actually schedule a lunch and then, show up and actually eat lunch, together, where you actually have your lunch and you're socializing the way you normally would. It can be a little jarring, I guess, to do that if you're not used to teleconferencing, but it's close enough to kind of create some of that camaraderie. And it's, in a sense, not any more artificial than declaring that, every Thursday is team lunch day. That's also a little artificial. So do something like that. If that maybe isn't attracting enough people, you can get a little more structured. This is something Amanda's taken over organizing our social stuff because I'm honestly not the best at it. But she had this idea like, let's have themed discussions. And the first one of those that we did had some pretty good turnout. So maybe one thing that somebody suggested in our Slack was have a theme discussion where it's like a 20-minute session where somebody's explaining something that they know how to do that maybe other people don't know how to do, something like that. Or create something that would be a good roundtable topic. Like the one we did literally today was what was something that told you it was time to move on from a job. It might not be the best one to do at work right now, but anyway, something like that gives everyone a chance to talk, or maybe something that's someone presenting but in kind of an informal setting, and those can sort of alleviate the awkwardness and need for any icebreakers, and give people a chance to talk and chat, which is something I'm sure they've been missing. So try something like that. Another interesting suggestion that I saw, I have no experience with this personally, but we had somebody in Slack mention, do some like improv games over virtual hangouts. That seems like it could be fun. I am an introvert. I might show up and ask to watch that instead of participating, but hey, I don't know, maybe I would participate. So anything like that is kind of structured and gets people together. If you're running a team, I would suggest not making participation in these things mandatory. Everybody's stressed out enough. So make these optional. Do everything you can to, bring people in and make them feel like they're in it together. As you're doing all of these things, I would try to deftly, as a moderator, discourage any controversial conversations, arguments, points of contention. Like there's enough of that going on right now, and that might get a few people into a really spirited debate while all of the others check out and really maybe don't want to repeat that experience. So try to keep it lighthearted. Try to give everyone a chance to talk and, make it productive. So yeah, that's kind of, a lot of the arrows in the quiver I can think of. I mean, another big one that Hit Subscribe does is we have tried to, once or maybe even more than that, like opportunistically whenever possible, facilitate in-person meetups. So that probably wouldn't apply to workspaces that were formerly co-located. You're going to have an in-person meetup in a month or whenever life starts to trickle back to normal. But, maybe you could make some kind of plans to do something special down the line. Varying things up that way, I think is a good technique, and it gives some people something to look forward to. So that's another thing that you might do is plan some gatherings. What are we all going to do when this ability we have to all get together and interact that we've taken for granted? Once we have this again, what are we going to do? So yeah, hopefully some of that is helpful. I know that it's got to be a pretty big adjustment. It's been so many years for me, I can't directly relate to it anymore, but kind of like the in-person workplace, having, positive common interaction does require work. It's maybe a different kind of work. I think in person, there's probably more emphasis on making sure those remain positive because the interactions sort of happen by default one way or another. But with remote work, it's kind of about showing up and making sure that they happen at all, and that's not easy. And I would say, I mean, it's not really in my personality to be super facilitative, but if you think it would feel kind of silly to do it, you'd be surprised by how not silly it feels when you actually kind of do show up there and say, hey, let's have a discussion, or here's a thought I've had, or here's a meme. Go ahead and do it. People will jump in and start talking, and before you know it, you'll be having a discussion that isn't quite the same thing as hanging out at the water cooler, but nevertheless, there you are having enjoyable conversations. So hopefully all of that helps. Stay safe. Hopefully you can get back to working relatively soon, however it is that you prefer to work. And, maybe at the end of this, you'll have a little bit more of an affinity for remote work. Who knows? It's not for everybody, but it's certainly for a lot of us. So for those of you, who aren't such fans, hopefully you can make the best of it. And for those of you who like it, maybe you'll get to do more of it. So yeah, thanks for watching. We'll catch you next week.